Hello, girls. Lena here. Have you ever agreed to something completely absurd because the person asking made it feel like the only sane choice? Today's story starts with a fake engagement, a reality show that took everyone by surprise, and two best friends who had absolutely no idea what they were really getting into. Let's go!
I was 29 when my life became a headline I didn't ask for. When a single envelope stamped final notice made me realize I'd been surviving on optimism the way some people survive on sugar. Quick, false, and destined to crash. The studio I'd built from nothing was gone. The credit cards were maxed. My inbox was a cemetery of following up emails I couldn't answer without shaking. And the worst part wasn't the money. It was the quiet shame of feeling like I'd disappointed the version of myself who used to believe talent automatically turned into security. If you've ever watched your life start to slip like sand through your fingers, you already know what I'm about to say. You don't make dramatic choices because you're brave. You make them because you're cornered. Before we jump in, if you like intense, cinematic love stories with real emotions and messy choices, subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, did you see this coming? Or did the ending catch you off guard? I read them. I really do. It makes this feel less like I'm confessing into a void and more like we're sitting together, sharing the same late-night truth. My name is Rowan Hart, and I've always been the friend who jokes first so nobody notices I'm bleeding. I can talk my way out of awkward silences, charm my way through unfamiliar rooms, and pretend I'm fine with the kind of skill that used to impress people at parties. But underneath that, I'm the girl who double-checks the lock 3 times and keeps a mental list of every time I've ever failed. I'd been a wedding photographer. Ironic, right? Capturing other people's certainty while my own life unraveled in invisible threads. Cassidy Lane was the opposite of unraveling. She didn't fray. She didn't spiral. She was the kind of person who made lists and then actually followed them, who could walk into a crisis and somehow lower the temperature in the room. We met in college when she corrected a professor mid-lecture with a calm, surgical precision that made me laugh out loud. After class, I told her she was terrifying. She told me my laugh was reckless. We've been inseparable ever since. Best friends in the way people mean when they say, "I don't know who I'd be without you." When Cassidy asked me to come over that Tuesday night, I expected one of her usual emergencies. A broken faucet, a stalled car, a moral dilemma about whether to ghost a terrible date. Instead, I found her at her kitchen table with her laptop open, a yellow legal pad filled with neat handwriting, and a look on her face that made my stomach drop. She slid a mug of coffee toward me like this was a business meeting and not 2 women who had shared hangovers and heartbreaks and 1,000 ordinary mornings. "I need you to listen," she said, and her voice had that careful steadiness she used when she was afraid of falling apart. I made a joke, something about her sounding like a hostage negotiator, but it bounced off the air and died. Cassidy took a breath and turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was a glossy promo image. A luxury villa, ocean in the background, couples smiling too brightly. Big letters across the top read, "Heart Match, the Couples Challenge." Beneath it, "Win 1-0000." I stared, waiting for the punchline. Then I saw the eligibility requirement in bold, "Engaged couples only." Cassidy's gaze didn't flinch. "We could do it," she said. I blinked. Once. Twice. "We could do what?" "Go on the show." Her fingers tightened around her mug. "As a couple." I laughed, because my brain refused to accept it as real. "Cass, you're not even good at lying about liking someone's casserole." "I'm good at lying when it matters," she said quietly. There was a silence that didn't feel like silence. It felt like a door closing somewhere far away. I looked at her, really looked, at the slight tremor in her hand, at the way she held herself too straight, like she didn't trust her body not to betray what she was feeling. "Why?" I asked, and all my humor drained out of the question. Cassidy's eyes flicked toward the stack of mail on her counter. I recognized the paper that had been haunting my own apartment. Official, unforgiving, final. My mom's medical bills, she said. The insurance fight is dragging. I've been covering what I can, but it's not enough. I'm running out of time. My chest tightened. Cassidy never asked for help. Cassidy helped other people. Cassidy carried her world like she was built for weight. And you want to marry me on television? I tried to sound light, but it came out thin. Engaged, she corrected automatically, then softened. Fake engaged, just long enough to get on the show. We do the challenges. We win. We split the money. I fix my life. You fix yours. Then we go back to normal. Normal. The word landed like something fragile, because the truth was, nothing about my life was normal anymore, and Cassidy was offering me a rope out of the dark, even if it was tied to something absurd. I stared at the screen again. The villa, the ocean, the couples holding hands like it was easy. They'll tear us apart, I said. Reality shows live on humiliation. Cassidy nodded. I know. And if we lose? Her jaw tightened, just for a second. Then at least I tried something that wasn't hoping the universe would suddenly start being fair. That was the moment I understood this wasn't a wild idea. It was desperation dressed in clean handwriting. And it made something inside me shift. Something I'd been resisting since the first bill I couldn't pay. I'd been waiting for rescue, for a miracle that didn't require me to be brave. Cassidy was asking me to build the miracle with her hands and mine. I swallowed hard. Okay, I said, and my voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. If we do this, we do it right. We don't go in as best friends pretending. We go in as a couple who knows each other. We practice, we build a story. We learn how to touch without flinching. Cassidy's eyes widened, not in fear, not exactly, but in the sudden awareness of what that would mean. The emotional cost, the physical closeness, the fact that we'd be watched. You're sure? She asked. I should have said no. I should have protected the easy version of our friendship, the one that didn't require me to wonder what her hand would feel like in mine for longer than a second. But I was tired of being careful, tired of losing quietly. I'm sure, I said. Tell me what the application needs. Cassidy exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. She slid the laptop back toward herself and opened the casting form. The first question blinked on the screen like a dare. How did you two meet? Cassidy looked at me, waiting. My pulse beat hard in my throat. I leaned closer, shoulder almost brushing hers, and for the first time that night, I caught a trace of her perfume. Clean, subtle, familiar in a way that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Start with the truth, I said. Just not the whole truth. And as the cursor blinked, I realized I was stepping into a story that would demand more from me than money or courage. It would demand honesty in places I'd never looked too closely. And whether we won the million or not, I had a feeling we'd already crossed the line where pretending stays harmless. 3 weeks later, Cassidy and I stood in the driveway outside my apartment with 2 suitcases and the quiet understanding that neither of us was entirely ready for what we'd started. The casting process had moved faster than either of us expected. 1 interview turned into 3. 3 turned into a psychological evaluation, background checks, and a camera test where a producer asked us how we met while a ring light burned into my retinas. Apparently, we were exactly what they wanted. 2 women with a long history, believable chemistry, and a story that could be framed as friends who realized they were meant for more. The lie wasn't even fully a lie. That was the unsettling part. If you've ever tried to pretend something on camera, you know the trick. Anchor the performance in truth. So when the producers asked how Cassidy and I met, We told them about the professor she corrected during a lecture and the reckless laugh that made her turn around. We told them about late-night diner fries and road trips with broken air conditioning. What we didn't say was that our engagement ring had been purchased 2 days earlier from a jewelry store that specialized in quick sales and quiet discretion. "Are you nervous?" Cassidy asked as she loaded her suitcase into the trunk of the production SUV waiting for us. "Only about 100%, I said. The driver pretended not to listen, but the tiny microphone clipped to my jacket probably caught every word. We'd been warned. Once filming began, assume you were always being recorded. It was strange how quickly a person adapted to that idea. My brain kept whispering that somewhere in a control room, strangers might already be studying our faces like weather patterns. Cassidy closed the trunk and leaned against the car for a second. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint smell of wet pavement. She looked composed in the way she always did before stepping into something difficult. Shoulders back, expression thoughtful instead of afraid. "Rowan," she said quietly. "Yeah?" "Thank you." I shrugged, because gratitude made this feel too serious. "We're doing this together. Don't get sentimental before we've even embarrassed ourselves on national television." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You realize we might actually win, right?" "That depends," I said. "How good are you at pretending to be madly in love with me?" Cassidy's eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary. "Better than you think." The ride to the airport passed in a blur of producer phone calls and paperwork. They'd decided not to reveal the filming location until the contestants were already traveling. Something about maintaining suspense. Cassidy spent most of the drive reviewing the show rules on her tablet. I tried to memorize small details about her instead. The way she tucked loose hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The quiet rhythm of her breathing when she leaned back in the seat. If we were going to fool an audience of millions, we needed to look natural. The private plane was waiting on a quiet runway outside the city. When we stepped onto the tarmac, 3 other couples were already there, surrounded by camera operators and assistants holding clipboards. The atmosphere felt half glamorous, half clinical, like walking onto the set of a romantic movie where everyone knew the script except us. "Smile," a producer whispered as we approached. Cassidy's hand slipped into mine. It wasn't dramatic. No grand gesture, no hesitation. Just a simple interlocking of fingers that felt strangely grounding. The warmth of her palm steadied my racing thoughts. I squeezed back automatically, aware that somewhere a camera lens zoomed in. One of the other contestants, a tall woman with platinum hair and a neon-bright grin, glanced at us and whispered something to her partner. The partner, a quiet brunette with a tattoo sleeve, nodded with interest. "They're already judging us," I murmured under my breath. Cassidy leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine. "Good," she said softly. "Let them underestimate us." The flight lasted 4 hours. By the time we landed, the sun had shifted into late afternoon, painting the horizon in warm gold. The plane door opened to reveal a coastline so stunning it looked almost artificial. White sand, turquoise water, and a massive modern villa perched on a cliff above the beach. A host stood waiting near the entrance, surrounded by lights and cameras. She wore a sleek white dress and the kind of confident smile that belonged to someone who had hosted a dozen shows like this. "Welcome to Heart Match, the couple's challenge," she said as we stepped onto the path leading to the villa. The words echoed in my chest like a drumbeat. This was real. We walked through the front gates with the other couples, cameras gliding around us like curious birds. The villa was enormous. Open terraces, glass walls, a pool that seemed to spill directly into the ocean below. "Okay," I whispered to Cassidy as we paused near the entrance. "This place alone is worth pretending to love you for a few weeks." "Flattery won't help you win challenges," she replied. "Maybe not, but it might help me survive sharing a bedroom with you," Cassidy's lips curved in a faint smile, but before she could answer, the host clapped her hands for attention. 12 couples will compete over the next 6 weeks, she announced. Every challenge will test your trust, communication, and emotional connection. The strongest pair will leave with $1 million. A murmur moved through the group. I felt Cassidy's fingers tighten around mine. Tonight, the host continued, you'll settle into your rooms and meet the other couples. Tomorrow morning, the first challenge begins. We were guided down a long hallway lined with cameras until a production assistant handed us a key card. Room 4. The door opened onto a spacious suite overlooking the ocean. One bed. One enormous bed. I dropped my suitcase on the floor and stared at it like it might explode. Well, I said after a moment, I guess the show is committed to the illusion. Cassidy closed the door behind us. The sudden quiet felt almost surreal after the constant hum of production staff outside. We knew this was part of it, she said calmly. Knowing something intellectually and seeing the bed are two different experiences. Cassidy walked toward the window, gazing out at the water below. The sunset painted the waves in soft copper light. For a moment, she looked peaceful, almost like this wasn't a televised experiment but a vacation. You don't have to pretend when we're alone, she said without turning around. I know. But when the cameras are here... I stepped closer, until we stood side by side at the window. The reflection in the glass showed two women who looked surprisingly convincing as a couple. We commit, I finished. Cassidy nodded, and for the first time since arriving, the weight of what we'd agreed to settled fully into my chest. We weren't just pretending for a camera anymore, we were living the lie. And somewhere deep down, a quiet voice wondered how long it would take before pretending stopped feeling like pretending at all. Morning in the villa didn't arrive gently. It came with sunlight flooding through the glass walls and the distant rhythm of waves crashing against the cliffs below. I woke slowly, disoriented for a few seconds, until the unfamiliar ceiling and the faint hum of hidden cameras reminded me exactly where I was. Reality show. Fake engagement. $1 million hanging somewhere at the end of 6 weeks like a lighthouse. Cassidy was already awake. She sat on the edge of the bed, tying her hair into a low ponytail, her movements precise and unhurried. She looked like someone preparing for a competition she'd studied carefully. When she noticed me watching, her expression softened slightly. "Morning," she said. "Please tell me I didn't talk in my sleep," I murmured, dragging a hand across my face. "You did," Cassidy said. My stomach dropped. What did I say? She paused for a moment, clearly enjoying the suspense. "You asked if the $1 million could be paid in tacos." Relief flooded through me. "That's a reasonable financial strategy." A knock sounded on the door before she could reply. When Cassidy opened it, a production assistant handed us 2 envelopes with the show's logo printed across the front. "First challenge briefing," the assistant explained. 10 minutes in the courtyard. The door closed again, leaving us alone with the envelopes. I tore mine open while Cassidy read hers silently. The card inside was thick and glossy, like an invitation to a wedding you weren't sure you wanted to attend. Challenge 1. Trust fall. One partner would stand on a high platform overlooking the pool. The other would guide them through instructions delivered through an earpiece. Blindfolded. One wrong step meant losing points. "Well," I said, setting the card down. "That's terrifying." Cassidy looked thoughtful rather than nervous. "You're afraid of heights," she said. "I'm afraid of unnecessary heights. There's a difference." "I'll do the platform," she replied. "You don't have to." "I want to." Her tone wasn't stubborn. It was calm, decisive. Cassidy had always been like that. Once she committed to something, hesitation disappeared. We walked out into the courtyard, where the other couples were already gathering. The host stood near the pool, cameras arranged around her like silent witnesses. The contestants were exactly what you'd expect from a $1 million competition. There was the platinum-haired woman I'd noticed yesterday. Her name turned out to be Tessa, and her girlfriend Lena, both of them fitness influencers with matching tattoos. Another pair introduced themselves as Grace and Monica, engaged for 3 years and running a successful tech startup together. Then there was Dylan and Harper, a quiet couple who seemed less interested in the cameras than everyone else. Cassidy's fingers brushed mine as we joined the group. "Relax," she whispered. "I'm relaxed," I said, which was a blatant lie. The host raised her voice to address everyone. "Today's challenge will test your trust in each other," she explained. "One partner will be blindfolded on the platform above the pool. The other will guide them through a series of movements using only their voice." The camera swung toward us briefly, catching Cassidy and me standing close together. I could almost imagine viewers at home already forming opinions. The first couple stepped forward. Tessa volunteered for the platform while Lena guided her. Even blindfolded, Tessa moved confidently, like someone who had spent years training her body to obey commands without hesitation. When she completed the course perfectly, the courtyard erupted with applause. "Show-offs," I muttered. Cassidy nudged my shoulder gently. Soon, it was our turn. Cassidy climbed the narrow staircase leading to the platform, while a crew member tied a black blindfold around her eyes. Watching her stand there above the water made my chest tighten unexpectedly. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "You ready?" the host asked. Cassidy nodded. A headset was placed over my ears so my voice could be transmitted clearly to her earpiece. The platform was higher than I expected, at least 20 feet above the pool. "Okay," I said into the microphone, trying to keep my voice steady. "Take 1 step forward." Cassidy moved without hesitation. Another step. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, and for a moment the scene felt strangely quiet despite the cameras and crew surrounding us. "Now turn slightly to your left," I said. She adjusted her position with perfect precision. Trust had always been easy between us. Years of friendship had built an instinctive understanding, how to read each other's tone, how to interpret small pauses in conversation. But this was different. This was Cassidy placing her safety entirely in my hands, while an audience watched. 2 steps forward, I said. She obeyed again. A murmur rippled through the spectators. The final movement required her to step backward toward the edge before jumping into the pool below. I swallowed. "Cass," I said quietly, forgetting the cameras for a second. "Yes?" 3 steps back. She stepped once, twice. The 3rd step brought her heels dangerously close to the edge. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Now jump," I said. Without hesitation, Cassidy leaned back and disappeared from the platform. A splash echoed across the courtyard. The crowd burst into applause as she surfaced, laughing, pushing the blindfold up onto her forehead. When she climbed out of the pool moments later, dripping and breathless, her eyes locked onto mine immediately. "You sounded scared," she said. I wasn't scared. She tilted her head slightly. "You always talk faster when you're nervous." "Maybe I just didn't want you to fall." Her smile softened. "Well," she said, "I didn't." The host announced our score moments later. Perfect. The other contestants clapped politely, though I caught a flicker of surprise in Tessa's expression. Apparently the fake couple had just taken the lead. Later that afternoon, after the cameras dispersed for a short break, Cassidy and I found ourselves alone on one of the villa's quiet terraces overlooking the ocean. The breeze smelled like salt and sunlight. "You jumped without even pausing," I said. "You told me to." "That's a lot of trust for someone pretending to be your fiancé." Cassidy rested her arms on the railing, watching the waves below. "Rowan," she said after a moment, "you're not just someone pretending." Her words lingered in the air between us. I didn't know how to answer that. Instead, I focused on the horizon where the sky met the water in a line so perfect it looked painted. Somewhere behind us, the cameras were preparing for the next segment. The competition had only just begun. But something about the way Cassidy had stepped backward off that platform, completely certain I would guide her safely, stayed with me long after the applause faded. Because trust like that didn't come from pretending. It came from years of knowing someone deeply. And suddenly the $1 million prize didn't feel like the most dangerous thing waiting for us in this villa. The strange thing about living inside a reality show is how quickly normal rules dissolve. Cameras become furniture. Microphones feel like jewelry. Conversations happen under bright lights with strangers standing 10 feet away pretending they aren't listening. By the second day, the villa already felt like its own tiny country, governed by rules none of us fully understood yet. Cassidy adapted faster than I did. That didn't surprise me. She approached everything with quiet focus, like someone solving a complicated equation. While other couples spent the morning lounging by the pool and whispering strategy, Cassidy studied the challenge schedule posted in the common room like it was a syllabus. "You realize this is supposed to be romantic television, right?" I teased, leaning against the counter beside her. "Romance doesn't win competitions," she replied calmly. "Pretty sure kissing helps." She glanced at me sideways. "Is that professional analysis from your years as a wedding photographer?" "Hey," I said. "I've seen couples kiss with enough enthusiasm to start small fires." Cassidy's lips twitched, but she returned her attention to the board. Beneath the schedule, today's featured event was written in bold letters, "Private date selection." Apparently, the winning couple from the first challenge would receive the first private date. That was us. A production assistant appeared moments later and clipped fresh microphones to our shirts before guiding us toward the garden path behind the villa. Cassidy and I exchanged a quick glance as we walked. Neither of us said what we were thinking. The more time the show gave us alone together, the harder the line between pretending and reality might become. The garden stretched along the cliffside, full of bright flowers and winding stone paths. At the end of it sat a small wooden table with 2 chairs overlooking the ocean. A basket rested in the center. "A picnic?" I said, raising an eyebrow. A cameraman gestured for us to sit. Cassidy pulled out my chair before taking her own. The gesture felt oddly formal, like we were rehearsing a version of ourselves neither of us had practiced yet. Inside the basket were fresh fruit, pastries, and a bottle of champagne. "Of course," I murmured. "Alcohol. That always improves decision-making." Cassidy poured 2 glasses anyway. The cameras stayed at a respectful distance while we ate. At first the conversation was easy. Safe topics about the other couples, guesses about upcoming challenges. But eventually, the quiet stretched long enough that the ocean filled the space between us. "Are you okay?" Cassidy asked. "With what?" "This." She gestured lightly toward the villa behind us. "The show." I shrugged. "I've definitely made worse financial decisions." "That's not what I meant." I knew that. The truth was, something about the villa made emotions louder. Maybe it was the constant awareness of being watched. Or maybe it was the fact that Cassidy and I were suddenly forced to behave like something we'd never been before. A couple. "I think," I said slowly, "that pretending might be harder than we thought." Cassidy studied my face carefully. "Because of the cameras? Because of you." The words slipped out before I could soften them. For a moment, the breeze carried only the sound of waves hitting the rocks below. Cassidy set her glass down. "Rowan," she said quietly, "if this starts to feel uncomfortable, we can adjust. The competition isn't worth damaging our friendship." There it was again, that steady loyalty that had always anchored me. I leaned back in my chair and laughed softly. "You're unbelievable, you know that?" Her brow furrowed slightly. Most people would be worried about the $1 million, I continued. You're worried about whether I feel awkward sharing a fake romance with you. Cassidy didn't answer right away. Then she said, You matter more than the money. Something about the simplicity of that sentence made my chest tighten. Before I could respond, a producer stepped closer. For the final segment of the date, she said, we'd like you two to stand near the railing. Cassidy and I rose from the table and walked to the edge of the terrace overlooking the water. The late afternoon sun painted the ocean in streaks of silver and gold. Great, the producer said. Just talk naturally. Naturally. Right. Cassidy rested her hands on the wooden railing while I leaned beside her. From this angle, the villa disappeared behind us. It almost felt like we were alone. You remember that road trip to Oregon? I asked suddenly. The one where your car broke down outside Eugene. Hey, I said defensively. That engine had character. Cassidy smiled faintly. We slept in the car that night. And you stole all the blankets. You kicked me in your sleep. Self-defense. We laughed quietly. The cameras kept rolling. Cassidy turned toward me slightly, her expression thoughtful. You know, she said, when we first met, I never expected you to become the most important person in my life. My breath caught. Wow, I said. You really know how to raise the emotional stakes during a picnic. I'm serious. I knew she was. And suddenly the air between us felt heavier. Cass, I said softly. Yes? If this show messes with our heads, we promise to talk about it, okay? Her gaze didn't waver. Always. The producer gave us a subtle signal. This was the moment they wanted. The romantic shot. I could feel the cameras zooming in. Cassidy seemed to realize it at the same time I did. We probably look suspiciously platonic right now, I murmured. Probably. So, I hesitated. Cassidy's eyes flicked briefly to my mouth before returning to my gaze. The movement was tiny, but it changed the entire atmosphere. You don't have to, she said. The strange thing was, I wasn't thinking about the cameras anymore. I was thinking about the way Cassidy had trusted me on that platform yesterday. The way she'd sat across from me at the picnic table worrying about my feelings instead of the prize money. And suddenly the idea of kissing her didn't feel like acting. It felt like curiosity. Slowly, I stepped closer. Cassidy didn't move away. Her breathing settled into something quieter. Neither of us moved away. Rowan, she said quietly. Yeah? Remember, she said, this is still a game. Maybe it was. But when I leaned in and our foreheads touched first, just for a moment, it felt like the kind of honesty that didn't need words. The kiss was soft, careful, just long enough that the cameras would believe us. But when we pulled apart, something in Cassidy's expression had changed. Not shock, not regret. Something quieter, and for the first time since we arrived at the villa, the line between pretending and truth felt dangerously thin. If the producers wanted tension, they didn't have to wait long. By the time Cassidy and I returned from the garden date, the villa had shifted into a quieter, sharper energy. Conversations paused when we walked into the main living room. A few of the other contestants looked up from the couches with expressions that were polite, but calculating. Reality shows were strange ecosystems. Every smile had an angle. Every conversation had an audience. Tessa was the first to break the silence. Well, look who had the romantic picnic, she said, leaning back against the arm of the sofa like a queen evaluating new subjects. Her girlfriend Lena stood beside her, arms crossed casually, watching us with a kind of amused curiosity. It was nice, I said lightly, setting my glass of water down on the counter. Nice, Tessa repeated, as if testing the word for flaws. You two must be pretty solid to win the first challenge. Cassidy stepped slightly closer to me, her shoulder brushing mine in a way that felt subtle but deliberate. "We trust each other," she said simply. Tessa smiled, not warmly. "Trust is great," she replied. "But connection matters more." The air in the room tightened almost imperceptibly. Before the conversation could slide into something sharper, the host entered the villa with a small crew trailing behind her. "Couples," she called cheerfully. "Time for tonight's announcement." Everyone gathered around the center of the room. "Tomorrow's challenge," the host continued, "will test emotional intimacy." A few contestants groaned dramatically. "What does that mean exactly?" Monica asked. The host held up a stack of cards. "Each couple will answer personal questions about their relationship. The goal is to see how well you truly know each other." A murmur passed through the group. Cassidy's hand found mine again. For most couples here, that challenge would be easy. They had real histories, engagements, shared apartments, families who knew them as partners. Cassidy and I had something different. We had 10 years of friendship, but the show didn't know that. After the host finished explaining the rules, everyone dispersed to prepare for dinner. The atmosphere had shifted slightly. Conversations felt more guarded now, like everyone was silently rehearsing their stories. Cassidy and I slipped outside onto one of the quieter terraces where the ocean breeze softened the tension. "That challenge might actually help us," I said. Cassidy raised an eyebrow. "Think about it," I continued. "We know everything about each other. Favorite movies, worst habits, embarrassing childhood stories. Couples who've only been together a year won't have that." Cassidy considered this. "You're not wrong." "But," I added, leaning against the railing, "we do have one problem." "What's that?" "If they ask about our proposal story," Cassidy exhaled slowly. "Right. We hadn't invented that part yet." The silence stretched for a moment before Cassidy spoke again. "Tell me something," she said. "Okay. When we were filling out the application, why did you say yes so quickly?" The question caught me off guard. "You already know the answer," I said. "The money. That's part of it." Cassidy waited. The ocean rolled quietly below us. "I said yes," I admitted finally, "because if anyone was going to fake an engagement with me, I wanted it to be you." Cassidy looked down at the railing, tracing a small line along the wood with her fingertip. "That's not exactly reassuring," she said softly. I laughed. Wow, tough crowd. But she didn't laugh with me. Instead, she turned slightly, leaning against the railing so she was facing me fully. "Rowan," she said, "about the kiss earlier." Ah, there it was. "What about it?" I asked carefully. Her gaze searched my face, not accusing, just thoughtful. "Did that feel strange to you?" Honesty had always been the easiest thing between us. "Yeah," I said. Cassidy's expression tightened slightly. "Because it felt natural," I finished. She blinked. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of waves filled the space between our words. "I wasn't expecting that," Cassidy admitted quietly. Neither was I. A laugh drifted from inside the villa where the other contestants had gathered for dinner. The world kept moving, but here on the terrace, something delicate had shifted. "Maybe it's just the environment," I said after a moment. "This whole place is designed to mess with people's emotions." Cassidy nodded slowly. "Probably." But her voice didn't sound entirely convinced. Footsteps approached behind us. We turned to see Lena stepping onto the terrace with 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you two might want these," she said, handing one to Cassidy. "Thanks," Cassidy replied. Lena leaned casually against the railing beside us, gazing out at the ocean. "You know," she said, "Tessa thinks you two are the biggest threat in the house." "That's flattering," I said. "It's also suspicious." My grip tightened slightly on the glass. Lena glanced between Cassidy and me. "Don't take this the wrong way," she continued. "But you two don't act like newly engaged people." Cassidy's voice stayed calm. "How do newly engaged people act?" Lena shrugged. "More intense. Less comfortable." The word hung in the air. Comfortable. Cassidy and I had spent a decade building that comfort. It was impossible to hide completely. "We've known each other a long time," Cassidy said carefully. "That explains it," Lena replied. But her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. She took a sip of wine before pushing herself off the railing. "Just a friendly warning," she added. "If the producers think your relationship isn't real, they'll start digging." With that, she disappeared back into the villa. The terrace fell quiet again. "Well," I muttered. That was encouraging. Cassidy stared out at the horizon, her expression thoughtful. "She's right about one thing." "What?" "We need to look more like a couple." I raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do we do that?" Cassidy turned toward me slowly. For a second, the ocean breeze lifted a strand of her hair across her cheek. Then she stepped closer. Close enough that the space between us felt like a held breath. "We practice," she said softly. The words sounded simple, but something about the way she said them made my pulse quicken. Because suddenly I realized this competition wasn't just about convincing the other contestants. It was about convincing the cameras. And maybe, whether we meant to or not, convincing ourselves. The next morning, the villa felt quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks open. Producers moved through the house adjusting cameras and checking microphones, while the contestants gathered around the long wooden table in the courtyard. Today was the relationship challenge. Cassidy sat beside me, calm as ever, sipping coffee like this was a normal Tuesday morning instead of a televised interrogation of our fake engagement. I envied that composure. "You ready?" I murmured. She set her cup down and looked at me. "Rowan," she said gently, "we've known each other for 10 years. "Right. We'll be fine." The host stepped forward with a stack of cards. "Today's challenge is called Know Your Partner," she announced. "Each couple will sit together and answer questions about their relationship. Your answers must match." A ripple of anticipation moved through the group. For every correct answer, you earn points. If your answers don't match, she smiled slightly, and the audience gets to see how well you really know each other. The cameras zoomed closer. Couple after couple took their seats. Grace and Monica performed well, answering questions about favorite vacations and the story of their proposal with polished ease. Tessa and Lena leaned heavily into flirtation, touching constantly, whispering answers that made the other contestants laugh. Then the host looked toward us. "Rowan and Cassidy, you're up." I exhaled slowly and followed Cassidy to the center chairs. The first question appeared on a screen behind us. "Where did you first meet?" Cassidy answered instantly. "University lecture hall." I nodded. "Political science class." The host smiled. "Correct." Second question, "Who said I love you first?" Cassidy glanced at me briefly. "Rowan," she said. I grinned. "Yeah, I'm emotionally reckless." Another correct answer. The tension in the courtyard eased slightly. Third question, "What habit of yours annoys your partner the most?" Cassidy didn't hesitate. "You leave coffee cups everywhere." I pointed at her triumphantly. "See? She notices everything." The host laughed softly. "So far, perfect." Across the courtyard, I noticed Tessa watching us closely. The next card appeared. "Describe the moment you realized you wanted to marry your partner." There it was. The question Cassidy and I had only partially prepared for. Cassidy answered first. "During a road trip 2 years ago," she said smoothly. "We got stranded outside Eugene when Rowan's car broke down. I nodded, picking up the thread. We spent the night in the car because every motel was full, I said. Cassidy stayed up telling terrible jokes so I wouldn't stress about the engine. The memory was real. We just changed the ending. That's when I realized I wanted to keep waking up next to her, I finished. The host studied us for a moment. Answers match. A few contestants clapped politely, but when I glanced toward Lena, she still looked unconvinced. The challenge continued. Favorite food. First vacation. Who apologizes first after an argument? Every answer lined up perfectly. Years of friendship had built a foundation stronger than most of the real couples here. Finally, the host placed the last card on the table. Which physical feature of your partner do you love the most? Cassidy answered immediately. Her eyes. My heart stuttered slightly. Her hands, I said. The host smiled. Perfect score. Applause rippled through the courtyard. As Cassidy and I stood to leave the chairs, Tessa suddenly raised her hand. Question, she said. The host turned. Yes? Tessa tilted her head slightly. They're very good at answering questions, she said slowly. But they still don't act like newly engaged people. The air shifted. Cassidy's posture stayed calm beside me. What do you mean? The host asked. Tessa shrugged. They act more like best friends. Murmurs spread among the contestants. Cassidy didn't react immediately. Then she turned toward me. Her hand slid gently along my arm, fingers settling naturally around my wrist. The movement was subtle, but deliberate. She pulled me slightly closer. Rowan and I have known each other a long time, Cassidy said evenly. That doesn't make our relationship less real. The host nodded thoughtfully, but the cameras lingered on us longer than before. The producers smelled tension, which meant they loved it. Later that afternoon, filming paused for a break. Most of the contestants retreated to the pool area, but Cassidy and I ended up alone in the living room. The villa felt strangely peaceful without the noise of competition. I dropped onto one of the couches and leaned my head back. Well, I said, that was fun. Cassidy sat beside me. You handled it well. I thought Tessa was going to start a courtroom cross-examination. She might later. I groaned. Cassidy studied me quietly. Are you okay? She asked. With what? With people questioning us. I shrugged. I've been judged by worse audiences than a reality show. Cassidy nodded slowly, but she didn't look convinced. Instead, she leaned back against the couch, close enough that our shoulders touched. For a few seconds, we both watched the sunlight move across the floor. Then she said something quietly. You said my hands earlier. What? In the challenge, she clarified. You said my hands were your favorite feature. Oh, I smiled faintly. They are. Cassidy turned her palm upward between us. Why? I hesitated. Then I reached out and traced my fingers lightly along hers. They're steady, I said. Cassidy's breath shifted almost imperceptibly. You trust them, she said. Yeah. She didn't pull away. Our hands remained loosely intertwined. No cameras, no competition. Just the quiet hum of the villa around us. After a moment, Cassidy spoke again. You know, she said softly, if we keep holding hands like this in front of the others, it might convince them. I laughed quietly. Research purposes. Exactly. But neither of us moved. And somewhere in the quiet space between our fingers, something fragile and complicated was beginning to grow. Not a strategy, not a performance, something far less predictable. By the fourth day inside the villa, routine began to settle over the chaos like a thin layer of calm before another storm. Mornings started with coffee and production briefings. Afternoons brought challenges. Evenings belonged to conversations that drifted between strategy and quiet observation. But the tension between Cassidy and me had started to change shape. It wasn't obvious, not something the cameras could easily capture, but I noticed small things. How often our hands found each other without thinking. How Cassidy's voice softened when she said my name. How my attention followed her across a room even when I tried to look elsewhere. The next challenge was announced shortly after breakfast. The host gathered everyone near the beach below the villa, where a massive obstacle course had been built directly in the sand. Tall wooden structures, rope bridges, narrow beams over shallow water. Everything designed to look dramatic on camera. This challenge, the host said, is about teamwork. Of course it was. Each couple would race through the course while connected by a climbing rope tied around their waists. Every movement had to be coordinated. You'll only succeed, she continued, if you move as one. Cassidy and I exchanged a glance. That sounds romantic, I muttered. Cassidy smiled faintly. Or dangerous. The starting line buzzed with nervous energy as the couples clipped themselves into the harnesses. When the rope tightened between Cassidy and me, I became suddenly aware of how close we had to stand to keep our balance. Left foot first, she said quietly. Are you already giving instructions? I'm optimizing our odds. Of course you are. The whistle blew. The first obstacle was a narrow balance beam above a shallow pool. Tessa and Lena moved quickly ahead of everyone else, their athletic confidence obvious. Cassidy stepped onto the beam first, the rope pulling gently at my waist. Follow my pace, she said. I placed my foot behind hers carefully. Step, step. The rope forced us into rhythm. At the halfway point, I lost my balance slightly, my shoulder bumping into hers. Cassidy's hand shot out instantly, steadying me. Got you, she murmured. The words were soft enough that the cameras probably missed them, but I felt them anyway. We crossed the beam without falling and continued through the rest of the course. Rope walls, crawling tunnels, and a final sprint through knee-deep water. By the time we reached the finish line, both of us were breathless and laughing. Second place, the host announced. Not bad. Tessa and Lena had finished first, but the gap was small enough that the rest of the contestants looked at us with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. As the crew reset equipment for the next filming segment, Cassidy and I wandered toward the edge of the water to cool down. You're competitive, I said, splashing a little seawater onto my arms. You say that like it's a problem. I say that like I'm glad you're on my team. Cassidy looked at me for a moment, her expression thoughtful. You're better at this than you think, she said. At obstacle courses? At trusting someone. Before I could respond, laughter erupted behind us. Tessa and Lena were walking back from the finish line, still buzzing with adrenaline. Lena wrapped an arm casually around Tessa's shoulders as they passed. Nice run, Lena said. Cassidy nodded politely, but Tessa's gaze lingered on me a little too long. You two move well together, she said. Thanks, I replied. She smiled. Then she turned to Cassidy. You ever worry, Tessa said slowly, that Rowan might realize she could do better? The question landed like a pebble dropped into still water. Cassidy didn't react immediately, but something in my chest tightened. Better? I asked lightly. Tessa shrugged. You know, more excitement. Cassidy stepped slightly closer to me. Rowan seems perfectly satisfied, she said calmly. Tessa's smile didn't fade. I'm sure she is. Then she and Lena walked away. I stared after them. Well, I said. That was subtle. Cassidy watched the waves for a moment. She's trying to get in our heads. Is it working? Cassidy turned toward me. No. But something about the tightness in her voice suggested she wasn't entirely immune. That evening, the villa hosted a casual pool party segment for the show. Music played from hidden speakers, while cameras floated around capturing conversations and flirtations. I sat on the edge of the pool with my feet in the water, watching reflections ripple across the surface. Cassidy joined me a minute later, 2 drinks in hand. "Peace offering," she said, handing me one. "For what crime?" "Existing in a high-stress environment." I accepted the glass. Across the pool, Tessa and Lena were talking animatedly with another couple. "Do they bother you?" Cassidy asked. "Tessa?" Cassidy nodded. I considered the question. "Maybe a little." "Why?" I shrugged. "She likes pushing people's buttons." Cassidy's gaze moved across the pool. "I don't like how she looks at you." That caught my attention. "What does that mean?" Cassidy didn't answer immediately. Instead, she set her glass down beside the pool and slipped into the water. "Cass, come here," she said. The water rippled around her as she floated a few feet away. Curiosity won. I slid into the pool beside her. The music from the patio sounded distant now, muted by the water and night air. Cassidy swam closer until we were only a few inches apart. "Earlier today," she said quietly. When Tessa made that comment, "You mean the 'you could do better' thing?" "Yes." I shrugged slightly. It was trash talk. Cassidy studied my face carefully. "You didn't seem entirely indifferent." I huffed out a laugh. "Are you jealous?" Cassidy's eyes didn't move. "I might be." That answer knocked the breath out of me. The pool lights cast soft reflections across the water between us. "You realize," I said slowly, "we're still pretending, right?" Cassidy nodded. "I know." But she didn't move away. Instead, she reached up and brushed a strand of wet hair away from my forehead. The touch was gentle, unscripted. "Rowan," she said quietly. "Yes." I think we crossed the line between pretending and something else a while ago. My heart pounded suddenly. "And that bothers you?" I asked. Cassidy's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "No." The distance between us disappeared slowly. This kiss felt nothing like the first one. There was no performance in it, no calculation. Just the quiet admission that something real had been growing between us long before the cameras arrived. When we finally pulled apart, the world felt strangely quiet again. And somewhere on the terrace above, the cameras were probably capturing every second of it. But for once, I didn't care. Because the kiss might have started as part of a strategy. But the way Cassidy looked at me afterward felt like the beginning of something neither of us had planned. The morning after the pool party arrived with a strange heaviness in the air, like the villa itself knew something was about to break. I woke before the producer's wake-up music started playing through the house speakers. For a few quiet seconds I lay still, staring at the ceiling while the memory of the previous night replayed in fragments. Cassidy's hand in the water, the warmth of her lips, the way the world had gone silent around us. For the first time since arriving on the show, the kiss hadn't felt like part of the plan. It had felt inevitable. Cassidy was already awake when I turned my head. She sat cross-legged near the balcony doors with a notebook open in her lap, sunlight spilling across the floor around her. The calm focus on her face would have been comforting any other day. But today, my chest felt tight. "Morning," she said softly when she noticed I was watching. "Morning." For a moment, neither of us mentioned the kiss. We both knew pretending it hadn't happened wouldn't work. "About last night," I started. Cassidy closed the notebook slowly. "I know." "You know what?" I asked. "That things are changing." I let out a quiet breath. That's one way to put it. Cassidy looked thoughtful, rather than panicked, which somehow made everything more complicated. "We don't have to decide anything right now," she said gently. "The show is stressful enough already." That was Cassidy's way of handling emotional chaos. Acknowledge it, then place it carefully in a mental box until the right time came. I nodded. "Deal." A loud knock interrupted the moment. When Cassidy opened the door, A production assistant handed us 2 new microphones and a message card. Mandatory house meeting. Living room. That was never a good sign. When we entered the main room, all the contestants were already gathered. The atmosphere felt tense, like everyone had been pulled out of private conversations at the same time. The host stood near the center of the room. "Before today's challenge begins," she announced, "there's something we need to address." My stomach dropped. Tessa leaned casually against the kitchen island nearby, arms crossed. "Oh no." "Some contestants," the host continued carefully, "have expressed concerns about whether every couple here meets the eligibility requirements of the competition." A murmur moved through the room. Cassidy's hand found mine instinctively. Tessa pushed herself off the counter. "I'll say it directly," she said. "Rowan and Cassidy don't act like an engaged couple." Every camera in the room swung toward us. Cassidy's voice stayed calm. "What exactly do you think an engaged couple acts like?" Tessa shrugged lightly. "People who are planning to spend their lives together usually have more chemistry than 2 roommates." My pulse hammered in my ears. "This is ridiculous," I said. "Is it?" Tessa replied. Lena stepped forward beside her. "We just think it's fair to ask," Lena said, her tone slightly gentler. "If someone here isn't actually engaged, that's against the rules." The room fell quiet. The producers loved this. Conflict meant ratings. Cassidy squeezed my hand once before speaking. "We are engaged," she said evenly. "Then prove it," Tessa said. The host raised a hand. "That won't be necessary," she said. "Production has already reviewed the applications." Tessa's smile didn't fade. "But you'll be watching more closely now," she said. The host didn't deny it, which meant she was right. The meeting ended shortly after, but the damage had been done. Suspicion hung over the villa like fog. Cassidy and I escaped to the back terrace where the sound of the ocean muffled the noise from inside. "Well," I said, leaning against the railing. "That went great." Cassidy remained quiet for a moment. "They're trying to pressure us into slipping up. I noticed." I dragged a hand through my hair. "We should have expected this." Cassidy nodded slowly. "Probably." I glanced at her. "You're being very calm about the possibility of us getting kicked off the show." She turned toward me. "Rowan." "Yes?" "The money matters," she said. "But not enough to destroy you." That answer caught me off guard. "Destroy me?" "You hate being publicly humiliated," Cassidy said quietly. "And that's exactly what they're trying to do." The realization made my stomach twist. She wasn't wrong. Reality television thrived on embarrassment. Cassidy stepped closer. "If this gets worse, we walk away." The words stunned me. "Cass, this show could solve everything for you." "I know. And you'd still quit." Her gaze didn't waver. "Yes." My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the competition anymore. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Cassidy reached out and gently brushed her thumb across the back of my hand. The gesture was simple. But this time, it didn't feel like strategy. "You know what the weirdest part of all this is?" I said quietly. "What?" Tessa might be right. Cassidy frowned slightly. "In what way?" "We didn't come here as a real couple," I said. "But somewhere between the challenges and the pretending." My voice trailed off. Cassidy finished the sentence for me. "Something real started happening." The words hung between us. Neither of us tried to deny them. Behind us, the sound of cameras moving through the villa signaled the beginning of another filming segment. The competition wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was becoming more dangerous. Because now we weren't just protecting a lie. We were protecting something fragile that had grown out of that lie. And if the producers pushed hard enough, the truth might destroy us long before the final challenge ever began. By the 5th week, The villa had stopped feeling like a game. Reality shows start with excitement, beautiful locations, dramatic music, the illusion that everything happening is slightly exaggerated for entertainment. But once the days stack up and sleep becomes inconsistent, the emotional walls between people begin to crack. And when they crack, the truth slips through. The night after Tessa's accusation, Cassidy and I barely slept. Not because of the cameras, because of the conversation we'd had on the terrace. Something real had begun between us. Neither of us denied it anymore, but neither of us knew what to do with it either. When the morning announcement echoed through the house speakers, the tension returned immediately. "Couples," the host's voice called, "please gather in the courtyard." Cassidy and I walked outside together, the gravel crunching beneath our shoes. The remaining couples stood in a semicircle around the pool. Only 5 pairs were left now. The competition had slowly eliminated the others through challenges and votes. The final was approaching. "You've all made it further than most contestants ever do," the host said. "But today's challenge will determine which 3 couples move on to the finale." A ripple of nervous energy passed through the group. "This challenge," she continued, "is called Leap of Faith." A large screen behind her flickered on. The image revealed a platform built high above the ocean cliffs behind the villa. My stomach dropped immediately. "Each couple will climb the platform together," the host explained. "One partner will jump into the ocean below while the other holds the safety rope." Cassidy glanced at me. "You hate heights," she said quietly. "I'm starting to think the producers read my therapy notes." The host continued. "If the rope handler hesitates or loses grip, the couple loses points. Trust again. Always trust." The first couple stepped forward. Grace jumped while Monica held the rope steady. They completed the challenge smoothly, the crowd cheering when Grace splashed into the ocean below. Then it was Tessa and Lena's turn. Tessa volunteered to jump. She climbed the ladder confidently and stood at the edge of the platform like she'd been waiting her entire life for a dramatic moment. "Ready?" the host asked. "Always," Tessa replied. She jumped without hesitation. Lena controlled the rope perfectly. Applause followed. Then the host looked toward us. "Rowan and Cassidy." I exhaled slowly. Cassidy stepped closer. "I'll jump," she said. "Cass, you trust me, right?" That question hit deeper than she probably intended. "Of course I do." She squeezed my hand once before walking toward the ladder. Watching her climb made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. Not fear of losing the challenge. Fear of losing her. When Cassidy reached the top, the wind tugged at her hair as she looked down toward the water far below. The rope rested firmly in my hands. "Rowan," the host called. "You're ready." I nodded, but my grip tightened instinctively. Cassidy glanced down at me. Even from that height, I could see the calm confidence in her expression. "Trust me," she called. I almost laughed. "Cass," I shouted back, "you're literally the one jumping." She smiled. Then she stepped off the platform. For half a second, the rope went slack. Then her weight pulled against my arms as gravity took hold. I leaned back instinctively, controlling the descent, just like the instructors had shown us earlier. The rope slid through the pulley smoothly. A second later, Cassidy hit the water safely with a splash that echoed against the cliffs. Cheers erupted around the platform. I barely heard them. My eyes stayed locked on the ocean below until Cassidy resurfaced. She waved toward me. Relief flooded my chest so fast it almost made me dizzy. A few minutes later, she climbed back up the stairs to the viewing area where the rest of the contestants stood. Her hair was soaked, her breathing uneven, but she looked exhilarated. "Nice catch," she said, nudging my shoulder lightly. "Nice jump." The host checked her tablet. "Congratulations," she announced. Rowan and Cassidy advanced to the finale. The courtyard erupted with applause. 3 couples remained, Grace and Monica. Tessa and Lena. Cassidy and me. Later that evening, the villa held a quiet celebratory dinner for the finalists. Cameras floated around the room, capturing every reaction, every small conversation. But Cassidy and I eventually slipped outside to the beach below the cliffs. The tide had come in, the waves rolling gently across the sand. "You did great today," Cassidy said as we walked along the shoreline. "You jumped off a cliff," I replied. That was the impressive part. She laughed softly. "Rowan, yeah? You didn't hesitate. With the rope?" She nodded. "I trusted you," I said. The words felt heavier than usual. Cassidy stopped walking. The moonlight reflected off the water behind her. "We should talk about what happens after the show," she said quietly. I knew this moment was coming. "What do you mean?" "If we win the $1 million..." She hesitated. "What happens to us?" The question hung in the night air between us. I had spent weeks avoiding that thought, because the answer was terrifying. "We go back to normal," I said finally. Cassidy's expression didn't change. "Normal?" "Friends," I clarified. The silence that followed felt deeper than the ocean beside us. Cassidy looked out at the horizon. "Right," she said. But something in her voice had shifted. And suddenly I realized the truth. The hardest part of this entire competition wouldn't be the final challenge. It would be deciding whether what had grown between us was something we were brave enough to keep. Because pretending to fall in love for a television show had been easy. But admitting that it was real? That was the kind of leap neither of us had practiced. The final day of the competition arrived with the kind of quiet tension that settles over a place before a storm. The villa felt different that morning. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. After weeks of cameras, challenges, and carefully controlled emotions, only 3 couples remained. Grace and Monica, Tessa and Lena, Cassidy and me. I woke before the producer's music again. For a few minutes, I stayed in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation from the beach the night before. What happens to us after the show? I had said we would go back to normal. Friends. The word had sounded reasonable when I said it. But sometime during the night, the realization settled in my chest like a slow weight. Nothing about this felt normal anymore. When I stepped out onto the balcony, Cassidy was already there. She leaned against the railing, watching the ocean the same way she had almost every morning since we arrived. Her calm presence had become something steady in my life, something I didn't want to lose. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning." Neither of us mentioned the conversation from the night before. The tension lingered between us quietly, but the competition didn't pause for emotional clarity. A few minutes later, the host's voice echoed through the house speakers. "Finalists, please gather on the beach." The final challenge was waiting. The entire production crew had gathered near the shoreline. Large cameras, drones overhead, and a structure built into the sand that looked more elaborate than anything we had seen before. The host stood in the center. "This is the final challenge," she announced. The ocean wind tugged at the flags around the course. For the first time this season, couples will compete simultaneously. You'll complete a series of tasks designed to test trust, communication, and endurance. A massive obstacle course stretched across the beach. Climbing walls, puzzle stations, kayaks waiting near the water. This challenge ends with one final test, the host continued. The last couple standing will win $1 million. My stomach twisted. Cassidy glanced at me. "Ready?" she asked. "Ask me again after coffee." She smiled faintly. The horn sounded. All 3 couples launched forward at once. The first stage required climbing a cargo net wall while attached to the same rope harness we had used in earlier challenges. Cassidy moved ahead smoothly while I followed closely behind. Years of knowing each other made our coordination almost instinctive. Grace and Monica struggled behind us, but Tessa and Lena kept pace. The second stage involved solving a puzzle box that unlocked the kayaks waiting near the water. Cassidy and I crouched beside the table studying the pieces. "Rotate that one," Cassidy murmured. I shifted the tile. The lock clicked open. "Got it." We sprinted toward the shoreline and pushed the kayak into the surf. The cold water splashed against our legs as we climbed inside. "Left," Cassidy said. "Already doing it." The kayak cut through the waves faster than I expected. When we reached the buoy marking the turnaround point, I glanced back. Tessa and Lena were only a few seconds behind us. Of course they were. The final stretch required running back up the beach carrying a heavy crate together before reaching the final platform. Every muscle in my arm screamed as we lifted the crate. "Still worth $1 million?" I panted. Cassidy laughed breathlessly. "Ask me when we're done." Step by step we climbed the sand. The crowd of producers and eliminated contestants cheered from the sidelines. When we finally reached the final platform, only Tessa and Lena remained close behind. The host stepped forward. "For the final task," she said, "one partner must answer a question about the future of your relationship." Cassidy and I exchanged a glance. The host looked directly at us. "Rowan," she said, "you answer." "Of course." My heart hammered in my chest. The host held up the final card. "If you win the $1 million, what is the first thing you and Cassidy will do together after the show ends?" The question should have been easy. A vacation. A celebration. Something light. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, because the real answer was complicated. Cassidy watched me quietly, her expression calm but vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. The cameras zoomed closer. I could hear my own heartbeat. Then the words came out before I had time to overthink them. "I'm going to ask her on a real date." The beach went silent. Cassidy blinked. "What?" she said softly. I looked at her. "A real date," I repeated. "No cameras, no challenges, no pretending." The host smiled slowly. "And if she says yes?" I shrugged. "Then maybe we'll see where this actually goes." Cassidy stared at me for a long moment. Then she laughed quietly. "Rowan." "Yeah?" "You realize that answer just won us the challenge." I blinked. "What?" The host raised her hand. "The winning couple of this season is Rowan and Cassidy." The crowd erupted. For a few seconds, the noise around us blurred into something distant. Cassidy stepped closer. "You idiot," she said, smiling. "Why?" "You could have said we'd buy a house or something." I shrugged. That didn't feel honest. Her expression softened. "So you meant it?" "Yes." The ocean wind moved gently across the beach. Cassidy reached for my hand. "Then my answer is yes," she said. And for the first time since the show began, nothing about that moment felt like part of a script. 6 months after the finale aired, strangers still occasionally stopped us on the street. Sometimes it happened at coffee shops, sometimes at the grocery store. Once, embarrassingly, while Cassidy and I were arguing over which brand of pasta to buy. "Are you the couple from that show?" We would smile politely. Cassidy was always better at that part than I was. She had a calm presence that people trusted immediately. But the truth is that the cameras had captured only a fraction of what actually happened to us. Reality television loves dramatic moments, confessions, accusations, cliff jumps. But the real transformation came afterward. It happened in quieter ways. Like the first morning, I woke up in Cassidy's apartment a week after filming ended. The curtains were open, the sunlight spilling across the floor, and for a few seconds I didn't remember where I was. Then, I saw her standing in the kitchen making coffee, hair messy, barefoot, wearing one of my oversized hoodies. And the realization hit me with ridiculous clarity. This wasn't a challenge. This wasn't pretending. This was just our life now. Cassidy turned when she noticed me watching. "Good morning," she said. "Morning." I leaned against the doorway. "You realize something weird?" I said. "That describes most things involving you." "Very funny." She handed me a mug. "What's weird?" "We pretended to be engaged for 6 weeks," I said, "and somehow dating you still feels terrifying." Cassidy laughed softly. "That's because now it's real." She wasn't wrong. Dating your best friend is a strange experience. You already know their favorite music, their worst habits, the story of every scar on their hands. But suddenly there are new questions too, like whether you should hold her hand when you're walking down the street, or how long to wait before kissing her in the middle of a conversation, or how to explain the way your chest tightens every time she smiles at you like you're the most interesting person in the room. Somewhere between those awkward moments, our relationship stopped feeling fragile. It started feeling inevitable. 3 months after the show aired, Cassidy and I took a trip up the California coast. No cameras, no microphones. Just the two of us driving with the windows down and terrible playlists competing for control of the car speakers. We stopped at a small cliff overlook near Big Sur. Cassidy leaned against the railing watching the ocean below. "You're thinking about the show again," she said without turning. "How do you know?" "You get that expression." "What expression?" "The one where you look like you're replaying something in your head." I joined her at the railing. "The cliff challenge," I admitted. Cassidy smiled slightly. "The jump." "Yeah." I looked out at the water far below. "You trusted me completely," I said. Cassidy turned toward me. "Of course I did. Why?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because you've been catching me my entire life." The words hit deeper than she probably realized. The wind moved gently across the cliffside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Cassidy tilted her head slightly. "You know something?" she said. "What?" "If someone had told me a year ago that my best friend would fake an engagement with me on television and somehow become my girlfriend." "I'm listening." "I would have assumed you were the one who came up with the idea." I grinned. "That's fair." Cassidy studied me quietly. Then she reached into the pocket of her jacket. My brain needed a second to process what she was doing. "Cass?" She held up a small velvet box. "You've got to be kidding," I said. "Relax," she replied. "You already used the engagement storyline once." I laughed nervously. "Then what is that?" Cassidy opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring. Not flashy, not dramatic, just elegant. "I thought about this for a long time," she said. "Cassidy." "Rowan, I'm not proposing." My heart slowed slightly. "Good." She smiled. "I'm asking something simpler." She took my hand. "Do you want to keep choosing this? Us, every day." The ocean stretched endlessly behind her, and suddenly the $1 million, the competition, the cameras, none of it mattered anymore. "Yes," I said. Cassidy slid the ring onto my finger. And this time there were no producers counting down, no audience waiting for a dramatic moment. Just the quiet realization that the best thing that came out of that ridiculous reality show wasn't the prize. It was the person standing in front of me, my best friend, my partner. And the woman who jumped off a cliff trusting I would catch her, long before either of us understood that we had already fallen for each other.
And if this story left you wanting more pack, more detail, more emotional, more of what happens behind closed doors, Secret Stories Between Them is where that lives. Link is in the pinned comment.